Next up, we have our keynote speaker for the day, and thanks very much to the New Zealand Global Roundtable for bringing Simon Kenny, Head of Impact and Communications at McDonald's New Zealand, down from Auckland to speak to us. Simon's been with McDonald's for 14 years, and so he's got a lot of knowledge on what they're thinking, and he's going to talk to us around beef exports destined for McDonald's markets. Simon will discuss the company's global commitments and direction as a significant buyer of New Zealand beef. He will explore the contrast between McDonald's sustainability goals and the mindset of their customers who may not prioritise sustainability as a purchase driver, but expect the sector to take meaningful action. So Simon, please come up. So Simon's going to speak for around 30 minutes, and then we will have about 15 minutes for questions.
Cool. Morning, everyone. I've come down from Auckland this morning, and I'm meant to be flying to Queenstown this afternoon, and just as I landed I got a message saying there's crosswinds, so I might be spending more time at the today with you guys than I expected. First of all, thanks for inviting us. I've done a couple of talks. Sorry, I wear glasses and I can never work out with notes whether I have to read them from here or not. But we've spoken to the beef sector a few times in the last couple of years, and I think what we've tried to bring is some insight into the global frameworks that McDonald's uses that transfer down to New Zealand, but also what our customers are asking for, which you guys might not necessarily see all of the time, and a lot of the industry groups that represent you don't necessarily see the guys who come in our doors and order McDonald's. So hopefully today, by the end of it, you'll get a bit of a view of that sort of full spectrum of what's going on globally and down to a customer. I always caveat this that in my job I know a little about a lot. I'm in a room of people who probably know a lot more than I do about a little bit of my job, so excuse me if when you get to questions I can't answer everything. I can always take some stuff away and come back to you. I spoke at a climate change conference in Wellington and someone asked me a question with terminology I'd never heard before, so I may look stupid, but it's there's some stuff that I just don't know, so excuse me on that. I'm pressing the on-off button here. Here we go. I've got it. There we go. First of all, the big sweeping statement from a global multinational like McDonald's. Everyone needs a purpose. The McDonald's purpose for the last probably 8 years has been this concept of feed and foster communities. How that translates as the biggest food service retailer is about making this positive impact on the world. Some fun stats for you. We serve about 70 million people in the world each day. In New Zealand, we serve about 1.5 million people a week. There's 40,000-ish restaurants around the world in over 100 countries, and I'm one of about 2 million employees, so a very big business. For context, McDonald's in New Zealand, 172 restaurants. We have about 10,000 staff in our restaurants. I work in an office of about 50 people. So we're a little blip in the McDonald's world in that sense, but what's interesting for you guys is that New Zealand is strategically a very important beef export market to the McDonald's world. We're one of the big 6 beef export markets to the McDonald's world, so that's why people like me have a lot more focus on their job in this space than we might do in other parts of the world, just by nature of that. Another long paragraph, but I just wanted to highlight some phrases around there. Around this is global language, but this I know that you guys are going to worry about realising value from what you do and what we're doing and why we're buying it from you for what price. But there's the McDonald's business is built on very long-term relationships. Any of our suppliers in New Zealand will tell you most of them have been with us since we started in 1976, and if you've watched the Founder movie with Ray Kroc, he has this concept he introduced in the McDonald's world of the three-legged stool, which is McDonald's the corporate, our franchisees, there's about 50 franchisees in New Zealand, and our suppliers. And the notion is if one of those legs of the stool is is not even, the stool's going to fall over, and that's what's largely put McDonald's in the ability to grow and continue to be a very large company, one of the biggest in terms of market capitalisation on the S&P 500. So it works if we get it right. We also have untold numbers of issues that people will come and ask us to try and fix, and so McDonald's tries to distill those down to the most important ones where we think we can use our scale to have the most positive impact. And again, climate action, and you'll see shortly the impact of beef farming on our emissions footprint is one of those areas. So that's why, again, it's a really important thing that we come and talk across the value chain and work with industry on, because this aligns with our global commitments. Just for your guys' interest, the 4 big areas that we do talk about, so it's really hard in these wide rooms, so if you feel like I'm excluding you, I'm going to keep turning around, is the 4 areas that we call our impact pillars. If you caught in my job title, I've got a really weird job title. It's called Head of Impact and Communications. Impact is what McDonald's refers to as sustainability, corporate responsibility, that type of thing. Our planet, so I'll talk a little bit about that, climate action, also packaging and recycling is a big area when you look at our impact on the planet. Food quality and sourcing kind of works hand in hand with that. Because we're such a big employer, you might have seen some of the stuff in the US recently around DEI and Trump making some changes in some court cases and things. You know, we're a big employer in the US. There's a lot of tension in the world at the moment about what's responsible as a large employer versus what's going on with some government policies and that kind of thing. But yeah, a massive employer, so of course that's important. And community connections, so that's something that's another part of my job, working with our franchisees on how they support the communities in which they operate, sponsorships, just being a good part of a community. And that's what actually differentiates us from a lot of our competitors, KFC, Burger King, those kind of guys. They have a salaried manager who runs that restaurant. We have franchisees who live in the communities. Their kids go to school with their customers' kids, and that's actually a point of difference for us. I'm about to go to Queenstown for the next 2 days to spend time with our franchisees. Like the beef industry, we consult with them on almost everything we do. And so a big part of my job in the next 2 days is going to be talking to them about what's happening in their communities right now and how can we do better to be a good influence on that community. Another big number, 2%. Well, it's not a big number, but it is when you think about it. It's estimated McDonald's uses about 2% of the world's beef production. So it would come as no surprise to you when you use that much beef that when we look at our emissions profile, beef is one of the most significant influences on that. Again, when we look at our global climate goals, there's a whole load of things that involve everything that we operate because we've got a lot of restaurants. So things like energy use, of course, is important. So we need to know how to measure that and do a better job at lowering the use of energy in our restaurants using more renewable energy. Lucky in New Zealand, we have that profile largely covered off already, but we can do things like LED lighting, more efficient ways of powering our restaurants. The partnering with suppliers and franchisees I've already talked about. I'm going to talk a little bit more today about how we work with industry, government, NGOs to try and get scalable change that's positive and lines up with what everyone else is trying to do. A lot of talk about regenerative agriculture, and obviously that means different things to different people in different parts of the world. I'll talk a little bit about what we've been doing in New Zealand in that space. Also land use change, again I'll talk about this. There's a lot of stuff going on around deforestation, which is more relevant even with our close neighbours like Australia versus what happens in New Zealand. So the nuance of being a big market for McDonald's beef exports, but trying to work out how we navigate our global commitments is where it's really interesting, and hopefully you guys will see a little bit of where we've got to with that. Circularity with packaging. It does my head in every time I go outside and I see McDonald's stuff on the side of the road because someone's thrown it out of their car. The idea of reusables in Western Europe, where it turns out they might not be as environmentally friendly as single-use packaging as people thought, was a good example of where a notion can sound like a good idea and be legislated, and then you realise afterwards the unintended consequences might not be so positive as they thought. And energy efficiency I've already talked about. This is one of those slides I hate showing because you're not supposed to show loads of detail on a slide, but you guys will probably find this really interesting because it's got numbers and stats and stuff. But all it's meant to indicate is that you can see the green bit there, which is effectively our global greenhouse gas emissions footprint, and the green bit, the light green bit, is beef farming. And then you go through to other areas of the supply chain in the dark green, beyond the on-farm emissions, and then the rest of it is everything else that contributes to our global emissions profile. So it's no surprise that you'd think if you went down to Scope 3 emissions that beef farming would be a big influence, but it's just to show you how significant that is and why beef farming is so critical for us to make sure we continue to improve. We entered the net zero race, like lots of big multinationals did. Go to those GAP conferences, sign up to those kind of net zero emissions targets and those kinds of things. I think what's interesting is the next slide I'll show you. But I guess the main thing for us was we were the first restaurant chain to start using all of our commitments based on science-based targets, so being verified and credible. And a lot of the stuff that we get is people come to us and go, what about this and what about that? And you go, how do you get that kind of credibility through the Science-Based Targets Initiative? Those types of third parties can provide auditing and guidance to say, okay, we think this is the right area to play in. How that looks, originally, that top line there where it says past global McDonald's target, that was the original one that probably if I was speaking at this conference pre-COVID, I would have been coming to you guys and going, oh, supply chain, we need a 31% intensity reduction per metric tonne of food and packaging. And you go, okay, that would have been right at the time, but with the reset and the updated global targets, you can see in the supply chain side of things, they've split it into two. So a 50.4% absolute reduction in facility logistics, plastics packaging, and then a 16% absolute reduction in farm emissions. And again, you look at that and you go 16%. Does that mean I have to reduce my on-farm emissions by 16% in New Zealand? No. That is a total number across the world. So the interesting thing then is how do we then look in Australia and New Zealand? A lot of our supply chain team are based in Australia. We have a sustainable ag person who would have been speaking here today if she'd been able to make it over, who's looking at this in New Zealand and Australia and going, well, what does that mean for us? I think it's good news because I think the way we look at it, you go relative to a Brazilian beef farmer or someone in Texas or someone in Ireland, the reduction targets might be less than those kinds of markets because of the nature of their farming. I don't think you guys would be surprised at that, but that's, when you think about how we have to translate it down into markets, this is where we get to. So this is the slide that our sustainable ag lead, Mary, is basically her kind of KPIs or her plan on a page. Probably where we're at on this is more in the data collection left-hand side than getting through to interventions and that type of thing. Particularly in Australia, they've been doing a project called Tassie to Townsville where they've got methane emission gathering equipment on farms, and they've been gathering that kind of data because they didn't actually have the data in the first place to start informing their decisions. So our ask, I'd imagine, through our processes through to farm is about helping us build that profile in New Zealand to help then looking at annual trends and then starting to verify that to then lead into what would be effective ways to move into the more intervention deforestation type areas. So that then starts leading us towards those targets. So we don't necessarily understand the profile from a McDonald's sense right away now. If you said to me, what do you need to do, what do you need us to do, I think we're still in that data gathering perspective, but I think the approach we're taking is this kind of whole of value chain approach and working with people, and I'll show you some examples in a minute to go, well, what's working, what could work, what could be scaled to help us incrementally get towards those reduction targets in New Zealand. broadly, if you summarised the way that they look at it from a sustainable ag perspective, it's how low can we go, how high can we grow. So again, I don't think this is going to be surprising to you guys. Regenerative agriculture, increasing carbon removals, carbon reduction projects, reducing carbon emissions. So it's again about what works in the different markets and then how does it contribute to that global perspective. So how do we do that? First of all, we helped, and Richard's in the room, and I can see Louisa as well. If anyone asked us, how big a role did you have in helping form the Roundtable for Sustainable Beef in New Zealand? I'd say, well, I sat in a processing plant in Hastings in about 2013 or 14 with one of our global ag leads, Australian guy, some of you might know him, Andrew Brazier, who'd flown from Chicago, and he sat down with our processors and some other people and said, you need to form a roundtable for sustainable beef. And they go, oh, do we need another industry group? You know, what's this going to do? Where does it fit? And you go, well, the global roundtable is informing the McDonald's world and doing really good work in the space. New Zealand at the moment, you don't have that. Australia has one. You need this because it actually represents the whole of the value chain if we get the membership right. And they started off by looking at this well, they did a materiality study at first, and then we started doing a verified sustainable beef from paddock to paddy program, just to sort of as a proof of concept. And now we're going with the roundtable. What's the next role? Where do we fit with things? How do we bring together everyone? The photo on the right is probably a good example. And if anyone's at the field days in Hamilton in a couple of months, you'll be more than welcome to come along. We ran a a panel discussion, and on that panel we had Richard as the chair. We had Sam from Beef and Lamb. We had I forget her name from SPCA, Anya from the SPCA. We had Ag Research, and did we have someone else? I'm trying to remember. Rabobank. So we really tried to cover off, and then me emceeing it, pretending I knew what I was talking about. But yeah, the idea there was to go, we just talked about what does sustainable beef production mean and what would the North Star be in New Zealand. And the idea was that everyone could just kind of free talk about it and what their own perspective from their part of the value chain was, to try and get this aligned view to come out of there and go, okay, cool, now we're all understanding different people's motivations and drivers, and we can start getting moving things forward a bit quicker. Another example of McDonald's putting its money where its mouth is to some degree was Richard's old farm, Whangarā. I say Richard's old farm, the farm that Richard used to work at or manage. And McDonald's set up a concept called Flagship Farmers globally. It wasn't just beef farmers. It was actually set up in Western Europe. They had, I think they had beef, potatoes, some other produce, those types of things. But they said, what does best practice for farming look like? And how do we show that in terms of people in our supply chain, and then get other farmers to learn and scale from there? I think I went down twice. We had our global head of sustainability come down on a horrific day with horizontal winds. We were telling him how beautiful Gisborne is, and it was going to be amazing. And have you seen the whale rider? And he just saw lots of hail blowing into his face on the side of a hill. But the idea there was to go, there was a whole lot of stuff on that farm through its land environment plan that we considered best practice in New Zealand sense, and that was stuff that we wanted people to be able to see and share. And it didn't just talk about like the environmental stuff. They had worker health and safety and mental well-being. They flew a guy down from California for 24 hours to actually interview guys on the farm to make sure that everything that was in the audit was correct. So yeah, it was a big program, and Richard became the first non-European flagship farmer, and then went off to our global conference in Orlando to talk a bit about that with a rancher from Texas and a guy from Ireland about the different what flagship farming meant in those different markets. Another more recent project when we talk about regenerative agriculture was putting some funding through Ag Research into an on-farm pilot in that space, and just going, what does that look like? What do you guys, rather than us coming in and going, this is what we think regenerative agriculture is or should look like, going to those credible parties and partners like Ag Research and going, well, what are you guys working on, and how can we help provide some more funding to continue that and get some more insights, which then we can scale, which is this idea. I just saw some stuff up on the slide slides before I got up, and this is the most recent thing I've been given to add into a presentation, which is this idea of beef on dairy. I'm still learning about it, so don't ask me any questions, but it seemed like there were some people in the room who could probably answer on my behalf. But I think from a McDonald's system benefits perspective, if you look at those two bottom areas, that idea of resilience and that idea of sustainability, the actual emissions benefits that potentially offers, aside from animal welfare and all those types of things, is where it starts looking interesting for McDonald's to go, well, that looks like something that could be a good part of the toolkit in New Zealand. We obviously also use a lot of dairy through Fonterra, shakes and sundaes. They're not made from chicken fat, they're made from real milk. And we also have this other side where I'll talk a little bit about it, but the activists around intensive winter grazing and that type of thing as well. So, there's other parts of my job where I have to think about these things. So that's a bit about the global context and how it's transferring down into markets like New Zealand, and then the type of work we've been doing over the last 8 or 9 or 10 years in that space. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what our customers are thinking. I'm going to give you a spoiler, which is they don't actually care at the moment, because the question we get most commonly is, well, if you get me to do this, can you charge more for a Big Mac? That's the sort of simplistic theory, right? And there's lots of drivers for how we price a Big Mac. But what I thought I'd do last year was actually ask customers what they cared about when they were buying some products. So we've got some research that we can show you. First of all, this idea that Macca's was this cheap deal. If anyone's got a family now, they know that if you go and get 4 combos, you're probably spending north of $50. So it's not that cheap anymore. People have also picked up on the Big Mac as an index the Economist uses for currency valuations. So every year I have to submit that, and people have a look at that, and they can see that a Big Mac now costs somewhere north of $8. Which, again, when you think about the complexity and the effort that goes into that burger, is probably not that much. But yeah, relative to what it was a few years ago, they go, it's gone up more than food inflation, so how does that work? An interesting thing that I thought I'd say to you guys is the way customers are at the moment. The air fryer is much of a competitor to us as KFC or Burger King. People are staying home, people are cooking. It's probably good for the people who sell stuff through supermarkets. But that's actually just a truth of post-COVID, that people are staying home on Saturday nights. They're not going out, and that's that discretionary spend right now that we're seeing, that tension where they want good value and they want something that will feed the family, but also they're going, I'll look at my wallet and what can I actually spend on. And I actually think that we've done ourselves a disservice and a disservice to beef farmers, that we made Big Macs and cheeseburgers so easy to get that people forget how much work goes into them. We have a target, if you go through drive-through, that you should be able to get through drive-through from the point you order to the point you get that bag out the window in under 150 seconds. And you go, how could you possibly make a product that's got any great value, any great quality, if I can get it made for me in 150 seconds and I'm out the door and off and running? It doesn't make sense, right? And you're charging me $8 or for a Big Mac, or $15 or $13 for a combo. So we actually have been going, well, how do you actually explain to someone? I used to think, maybe we should just have that drive-through wall, should talk about the life of that cheeseburger, going from a farm through to the entire process that gets into that burger that they eat in about a couple of minutes as well, to start people thinking a bit more about where that food comes from, but that's not as palatable as advertising the latest McFlurry or something like that. But I'll show you a little bit about how we're trying to do that in a minute. So research. Good news for everyone. We asked the first question. You always set people up and go, how much do you eat red meat still? Because there was this whole other thing. Again, if I was speaking probably pre-COVID, you guys would have all been wanting to ask me about alternative proteins and fake meats and stuff, and that seems to have dwindled to some degree. But largely, if you look there, most people are eating it at least once a week. Quite a few people, a third of people, are eating it multiple times a week. So they're eating red meat, that's okay. And that was outside of home, so that's not having a steak at home, that's actually buying something with beef in it when they're out and about. But when you ask them what was the purchase decision factor for why you bought that, it's sort of logical, but I think it's interesting. The taste of the meal, that's obviously you're buying it because you want to be satisfied. I think sometimes people forget that people eat food for joy and enjoyment and not just as nutrition that goes in their mouth, a bunch of kilojoules. The cost and value, super important in a McDonald's context, which again, that makes sense. Value is one of our most important factors in terms of our proposition. They say quality of beef. Now, I think that could be a proxy for all sorts of things, but they go, I want to know it's good quality. When you actually get down to asking them more specifically about, sustainability of sustainably produced beef or the sourcing of beef, like much less important. You can see 55%, 51%. So again, that's just to say when they're first going out, that impulse for why they're getting that Big Mac combo or whatever is much more about taste and quality than it is about sustainability. And there's been a lot of research where people talk about conscious consumers and, Kantar has their Better Futures report that comes out and it talks a lot about this whole idea. We have a lot of very detailed customer segmentation, and for sure there's a customer segment that considerations like where it came from and sustainability are important, but we've got a much bigger customer segment that's around value and satiety and those types of drivers. So sometimes we can sit up in Auckland in our agencies and think that we're the customer, but we're not. And you have to go actually into our restaurants and look at our customers to understand their motivations and their life and what's going on and everything else that's going on in their life and why they're making those decisions and what's important to them and how they spend those dollars. So then you go, what's most important when it comes to McDonald's delivery on using responsibly sourced beef? So we asked them a whole range, we gave them a range of options. Local sourcing came in number one, that's good, I think. Animal welfare came in number two, that's probably like a one that some people fill in research and they always go, I want to support charities more, and they never do because it makes them feel good that they've answered it like that. But I think, genuinely people want animals to have a good life. Again, when you get down to those more complex technical options like lower carbon footprint, global sustainability, climate commitments, much less popular as an answer. But that's true of lots of things in life. If you ask people, do you want the climate to be better or something very generic, they'll probably go, yeah, of course I do. And then you start talking about the very technical side of things and they go, it's too hard, I can't understand that. I hope someone else is doing it for me. And I think there's going to be a message at the end here for me, which is we're the guys who they hope someone's doing something about it for them. Then we sort of tried to tease it out a little bit and go, come on guys, give us some credit if we're doing this stuff. How much do you agree, disagree that McDonald's helping farmers produce more sustainable beef makes me feel better about the brand? Cool, 76% said it makes them, they agree or they strongly agree. By the time you're doing this kind of research, you hope they're going to answer something like that in that kind of way. But at least it's showing that actually there is when they know about it, it makes them feel better about McDonald's and the sector, so that's good. And points to a better future if we keep doing the right things. What best describes your attitude towards McDonald's commitments to produce more sustainable beef? It's okay. It makes them feel better, but again, they go, I don't actually care that much, but I'm glad you guys are doing it. Anyway, so that kind of posed us some interesting challenges. You go, we've got global commitments, we know it's important, we have to do the right thing. Translates to New Zealand, New Zealand's important. They're telling us food sourcing's important, so we've got a food sourcing story we should be telling because we think that's useful, especially when you get almost everything in the McDonald's menu locally. So hopefully then I'm going to show you how we decided to go and tell our customers about it, which is slightly different to how other brands, some of our processors who have public-facing brands and that do it, but it's bringing in some insights about actually how people want to find out about stuff. So, first I'll show you what we got wrong. About 2015, there was this program called Our Food Your Questions that McDonald's Canada started. You may have seen the original viral video. It was like, why does a quarter pounder looked different in the ad to what the one that you get in real life. And it was they went behind the scenes and they showed how they dress a quarter pounder for a shot, and everyone was like, oh, this is crazy, and so transparency, McDonald's, that's great. And all the McDonald's markets went, we need to be transparent too, we should all be transparent. And what you realise quite quickly is actually most people don't care. They like the rumours about pig fat and the shakes, and I heard you do this thing and you do that thing, and no, that's not true, and my aunt's hairdresser said this and that kind of thing. But actually once you get through the initial kind of first 100 questions, most people don't actually care that much. And also even worse, they hate it when McDonald's is worthy and earnest. When we're worthy and earnest, they're like, I thought you guys were meant to be fun. You guys, everything else you do is fun, and now you're telling me about, oh no, there's very little salt in fries if actually you put it into a teaspoon and you realise, and that kind of thing. And so it just didn't land, and we had a big learning there, which was we needed to be fun, but we needed to think about the different audiences and not just use one way of telling a story. This is a couple of years old now, but you might remember off the back of that research, we went, how do we then appeal to people at a mass level and then in an integrated kind of way transfer it down? Some of you in here love those. Everyone goes Country Calendar. You should do something like Country Calendar. Everyone loves Country Calendar. McDonald's should be on Country Calendar. We need drone shots of sweeping fields of beef farms with you guys standing on them, and standing on a fence and talking about the cattle and where the beef comes from and that kind of thing. And we were going, actually we don't, because people with McDonald's will go, okay, that's fine on Country Calendar, but what does why do I need to see another ad with that sweeping beautiful shot of our countryside? So instead of doing that, we invented a time travelling car with 4 mates, and hopefully this will work.
Everyone's talking about Area 51, and no one's talking about the other areas.
Well, I heard there was an area in Wanganui.
Can I take your order, please?
Can I get 2 Big Mac combos, a chocolate shake, fillet of fish, and an apple pie sandwich?
Excuse me, what's in the beef patties?
100% New Zealand beef. Anything else I can help you with?
Yeah. What are the fries made of?
Potatoes, taters, spuds.
What about the fillet of fish?
No,
Apple pie. I'm guessing real New Zealand apples?
Trees grow 'em, we pick 'em, you eat 'em.
Okay, but what
Take that, 2 apple pies, please.
Can I just try one?
Whoa.
So that ad got the most effective ad for the year that it came out. And the reason was people went, oh, it's a McDonald's ad, it's drive-through, I get that. It made me laugh. I know what they're doing. They're picking up on all the rumours and myths that me and my mates talk about. They've kind of presented in that kind of fun way. They've actually transferred it around, and then they've delivered it in that way. So sometimes marketing we make it harder than we think than it could be. That was actually, Richard will tell you, they scouted the entire Whangarā farms and they picked a spot just behind his house to film that bit where it jumped into the beef farm. But yeah, so I show you that, it's a couple of years old now, but just to go like, that actually landed with our customers because they just went, oh yeah, it's beef, of course it is, it comes from a farm. Maybe we need to be a bit more simple with that kind of stuff. But there's a lot more layers to that story that you need to get across. So what we did was we had things like assets, like that's a tray mat that's in our restaurant. We used a shot of Whangarā farms, but then we gave people a little bit more information about where a Big Mac actually comes from and the ingredients they go into it. And the idea was that you start nudging people's perception, because it's hard to really change someone overnight and go, okay, now I believe you, when you've got 50 years of rumours and myths and stuff they've read on Reddit now, and that kind of thing. So you need to nudge them along the way. So we started nudging them. Then we went, where else can we go where people wouldn't expect us? And it took us a couple of years to actually convince the Field Days guys up in Hamilton to let us come on the site. They didn't really understand why we wanted to be there, and we're like, well, everything we sell comes locally from the primary industry sector, basically, so you should do it. Again, one where we got it wrong, because we turned up and I literally stood there for 4 days in this really nice corner of our stand next to this big infographic on the wall talking about sustainable beef supply. I've had 2 farmers come up to me. One asked me about something about Angus verification and, well, actually the stuff that you guys know about. And I was like, sorry, I don't know about that. And someone else went, oh, you fucking idiots, right? Fucking here, you know, get out of here. But what we did have was an ice cream machine in the corner. And we realised that farmers are families, and they all turn up with their families, and they saw the Maccas. First of all, they were annoyed you couldn't get a Happy Meal, but they went, oh, it's free ice cream. Sweet. So actually now our stand at Field Days is more about just being there for families and going, actually, farmer families are just families like all of our other customers. You want a bit of fun, and there's a light touch on the food sourcing and sustainability side, but we actually take the serious conversation off to the side with the Roundtable of Sustainable Beef, go into one of their rooms, and then have the panel discussion there, and that's where we actually nudge the perception or talk about that stuff with other people. But for actually being at Field Days, it's actually just more about fun and giving them some free stuff and that kind of thing now. But there's also other ways you can tell the longer form story for people who care. So if you've flown on Air New Zealand in the last 3 or 4 years, at some point or another, you may have seen one of our articles in the magazine, and you can go into a lot more detail and a bit more technical information there because you've got a captive audience. You're going, okay, I'm on the plane, I'm reading about this, I might actually read a bit more, take a bit more in. I've got an hour on my flight, and you start seeding in. We went into some really interesting magazines, Mind, Food, Good, and again, ones that didn't really want us in there at the start, but we were just going, well, actually, there's a really interesting story here, so we should tell it. So that idea, and again, the only reason I'm telling you is sometimes you can be sitting there going, fuck, New Zealand, just listen to us. It's really hard to get them to understand technical stuff. It's hard to get them to just learn something straight away. You kind of have to just incrementally change and communicate that. So just finishing up, basically, how I'd summarise it anyway is you go, look, we've got global drivers that are clearly related to climate goals and our other sourcing commitments. We have to live by those. That translates into New Zealand as a strategically important market for Maccas. That's why we care, that's why we're here, that's why we work with the likes of the Roundtable, with all of those partners. And the idea of partnering with everyone rather than coming in and telling people what we want to do is critically important, and we think the way that we get the best success. And then how do we bring our customers along on the journey so that maybe in 5 years' time when they eat that Big Mac, they think a little bit more about where it came from, they're willing to pay a bit more for it, and they actually care a bit more. Hopefully they don't drop the rubbish on the floor as well. So that was me. We've left some time. I don't know if we've had questions come through on Slido, but
we have.
All good.
And you're bold enough to leave time to answer them. So they're, kind of quite tricky, and I'm not sure. With farmers being the one that's need to make the investment to reduce emissions, who pays? Will McD's pay for the genetics inhibitor, vaccine, farm system change? And you mentioned this sort of through your talk. Yeah, I think that's the age-old question. I should have explained actually the way that McDonald's buys beef across Australia and New Zealand. There's another company called FMG, not the main FMG here, who buy it like a commodity across Australia and New Zealand for the domestic markets and the export. To give you some context, last year we used about 6 million kilos of beef in New Zealand, about 25 million kilos was exported. So the quantum of export is obviously a lot higher. And then there's a commodity price, and I was even reading this morning, obviously in Australia, the trade minister's going to Trump and saying, if you like your Big Macs, you don't want to have to pay too much more if you want tariffs and that kind of thing. But there's all sorts of stuff that affects that commodity price. We think that if you're building it into the value chain and there's realises a benefit at the end, then it's going to play through in the commodity price. But it is a hard one because you have to go, where does the cost at the start come, which is probably the main thing, right? You go, where do we start investing, and where does that money come from? We've tried to do a little bit through some of the projects we've funded, which then hopefully you can scale and it helps amortise the cost. But that's where I think these whole of value chain organisations, and the guys before me were talking about the collaboration and consultation to go, how do we get the biggest benefit for everyone to make sure that still stays stable, so otherwise we don't have a beef supply chain.
doesn't really answer the question, I know, but yeah.
That was my question. I guess what we've seen is that Nestlé's paying the dairy farmers directly. So sorry. Sorry, I don't want to belabor this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robert.
So that question, I guess, really interesting thing is what we're seeing in New Zealand industry is Nestlé's funneling that money through Fonterra directly to farmers, right, that are making on-farm changes. So I guess, without asking you to make policy decisions on behalf of McDonald's, but do you see that happening in the beef sector as well?
There's probably better people to answer this for me, but I know that we've put funding through beef and lamb to help with like on-farm stuff. We've had the projects we've funded. Ultimately, it'll depend on the markets, I think, because I think they're so radically different. What's going on in Brazil versus what's going on in Ireland versus what's going on in New Zealand. So I think there used to be a pool of money, literally there was a pool of money out of the Global Sustainability Macca's team, and they'd go, okay, let's divvy it up between markets, and you guys go off and fund stuff. That doesn't really happen like that anymore. The way it tends to work is we have a thing called our variance account, which is like how we charge our franchisees for food and paper costs for everything, and you can build stuff into that variance account if you have projects. So free-range eggs is probably another example. Our franchisees actually in Christchurch back in the late noughties just when we believe that free range should be the future, not caged or colony. We want to buy those eggs and we'll pay the premium. Interestingly, we couldn't charge more for a bacon and egg McMuffin with that free range egg. They took the margin hit on that. So there's different ways that it plays out. Depending, franchisees get really interesting. I talk to them a lot, like they know I'll be here today when I go down and talk to them tomorrow, and they're like, why are you there? And we're going, because you guys talk about the cost of your food and paper costs and how much everything's going up and building margin into cost, and then we go, but it has to be viable right through the supply chain. So I think it's not as direct as Nestlé, but I think I don't know much about them, but they seem a lot stronger, and Tesco seem to be coming in going, do it our way or you lose our business, which is probably a slightly different dynamic or way of working.
So the next question there, I will I'll ask it in a slightly different way. The planting of pine trees is obviously a real prickly problem for all the sheep and beef farming at the moment. But I mean, does McDonald's believe that offsetting is a way to, solve the emissions problem?
Yeah, I think
planting trees.
I think I've heard this question asked of Mary, who's the ag expert in Australia before, and her answer was no, because they don't believe that the offsetting is the right way to go about it. It's different again, like that land use change stuff. Again, like other markets, they're talking about deforestation. And I kind of simplistically one day said, our problem almost seems like reforestation. So the quick answer is no. That slide I showed you, how low will they go, how high can you grow, but it's about more regenerative agriculture rather than going out and planting pine trees.
And next one here, you probably understand, we have all breeds sort of represented in this room. So why is McDonald's sidetracked with Angus beef instead of focusing on New Zealand beef?
That's a really interesting question because of some recent discussions. If you actually looked at our menu now, I think there's one burger on there called the Serious Angus that still uses that kind of brand. Years ago, I remember we used to have Angus Pure as the verifier, and then something changed, and we took that away. Again, 2008 or whenever that burger range was launched, my understanding anyway, it was pre my time, was people didn't, the consumer didn't really talk about Angus. It wasn't really like a sort of a brand they were familiar with, and all of a sudden supermarkets are stocking Angus mince and steaks as well. We've actually gone away from calling out Angus much. Like I can't think of the last limited time product we did that was a Angus specific product, because customers they like that big gourmet build. The fact it's probably to that question, it's just that it's beef, and the Angus is kind of a secondary quality cue now versus what it was intended for 15, 16 years ago.
So one here, which is a big topic within agriculture in New Zealand. Are McDonald's brave enough to hold up the stop sign on the methane myth, as more and more research is showing that ruminant methane not the problem?
Yeah, I was at a conference last year called the Xander McDonald Summit in Queenstown, and they had an Australian scientist who got up and showed the chart, and you guys will know the technical stuff much more than me about the different types of emissions and stuff like that, and he went, see, it's not a problem, and everyone in the room went, oh, it's not a problem, and I was like, oh, this is really weird, like, because it seems like if he had the right answer, everyone in the world would have the right answer, but I don't think we're looking at it that specifically. We're looking at our emissions profile and understanding the data, and then, like I said at the start, the understanding its relevance in New Zealand and the contributions and that kind of stuff. So, globally, I don't know. I'd have to check what the position is on methane specifically. There's a really good website called mcdonaldscorporate.com that has a lot of their latest thinking on it as well.
Okay, we'll just have one more question before we stop for morning tea. For the 16% reduction globally with New Zealand environment and grass farms, will we subsidise your global reduction? If so, will we be rewarded?
My understanding of the maths isn't that that's how it works. They go, there's a global profile, 16% reduction is the total global profile. New Zealand has a incremental impact on that rather than offsetting a country that's not using grass-fed beef. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Getting some nods. Okay, thanks very much to Simon, and you are away after lunch?
Yeah, I'll be here for the rest of the morning.
Yeah, so Simon's around to then, so if you want to catch up with him, do so, but yeah, thank you very much.
Cheers.